Hello, this is Bill Meridian speaking to you today from my office in Vienna, Austria. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to planetary stock trading. This is a term that I developed about 20 or 30 years ago to describe the use of horoscopes in the selection of common stocks. Indeed, Planetary Stock Trading was the title of my first book back in 1994. It is now in its fourth edition, and I'll tell you where to get it at the end of this presentation. The horoscopes can be cast for the time, date, and place of an incorporation and for the first trade on any exchange. The incorporation chart reflects the fundamental operations of the company. About 70% of the stocks trading on the NYSE are incorporated in the state of Delaware for tax reasons. A time must be stamped on these papers when this happens. The document is the Certificate of Long Form of Good Standing in the Secretary of State's Hall of Records. I have actually traveled there way back in the 70s, and the way that corporations become legally active is to submit all of the paperwork. The lady who takes care of this comes in the morning, checks the companies that are ready to be registered, and sets her time and date stamp. When she's sure all of the records are in order, she stamps each one, so the exact time and date are on the papers. So if a company is incorporated at 10 a.m., which is when most of them are incorporated, that means that at 9:59 a.m. on that day, you could not have filed a lawsuit against the company, but at 10 or after, you could have. Before 10 a.m., it did not legally exist in the eyes of the state of Delaware. The second most frequent incorporation time I found was 1 o'clock, but they can be scattered all over the day. Most other states use midnight, like California. Now, the incorporation chart reflects the fundamental operations of the company. So, therefore, matters such as strikes, new product success, the inner working of the company, these are all ruled by the incorporation chart. The moon and the midheaven in this chart do have some effect on the public perception of the company. This was a rule passed on to me by Charles Jane. This is true for any mundane chart. Analyze this chart to see how a new product will fare, or how a new CEO will work out, or whether you would want to work there. So any fundamental questions as to what is going on inside the company are all resolved by this chart. It gets a bit sticky because they do reincorporate, change their names, etc. The first trade chart, by contrast, rules how investors view the stock. Look at this chart to see how the release of earnings will influence the share price. That is the earnings surprise method, which is the primary one that I use. So this chart reflects the public perception of what's going on within the corporation. Evaluation of these charts. If you have two charts, there are four possible combinations. Both charts can be afflicted, both charts can be well aspected, one can be well aspected while the other is afflicted, or vice versa. The possibilities are both charts are afflicted. The news is bad and the stock declines. 2. Both are well aspected. The news is bullish and the stock rises. Those are the two that most people will find easy. The next two are difficult. 3. The incorporation chart is well aspected, the first trade chart is not. Operations are improving, but investors do not see it yet. 4. Incorporation is afflicted, but the first trade chart is bullish. The operations have not turned around yet fundamentally, but investors are buying the stock in anticipation of improvement. Now let me just state that I can give you a good example. When I was an analyst at Value Line many years ago in New York in the 70s, there was a company that had made a dramatic turnaround. The average PE ratio, price-earnings ratio, was 7. Theirs was 4.5. So the head of the company said to me, "Bill, why isn't the stock rising?" And I said, "Well, you and I see the improvement in the company, but you and I don't have the purchasing power to lift the stock." And we both got a chuckle out of that, but what I said was true. The first trade chart, when it becomes activated, does signal the time at which the perceptions change. And there is a very good example of this in all 4 editions of Planetary Stock Trading, Warner Communications, with an accurate horoscope of incorporation and a first trade. Horoscope of incorporation, very well aspected. They introduced the Atari game system. Sales take off, but then begin to taper a little bit, so operations are still good. Saturn hit the Sun-Jupiter conjunction. In the 10th house of the first trade chart, the stock stopped trading at 59, opened up at 33 the next day. That's a very good example that one should keep in mind. Now, the first trade horoscope is set for the opening of trading on the day of the listing. It may not actually begin trading at that time. Thus, it can be better termed a first listing chart. Usually, the president of the company will go to the floor of the exchange and purchase 100 shares for his own account just to kick off the trading as a symbolic PR gesture. Some stocks don't begin trading for an hour or 15 minutes later, an hour, 2 hours if they're very thinly traded and not very much in demand, not in the public eye. Or a market can become locked, like Netscape or Facebook, where there are so many orders to buy that it takes hours to sort out the buys and sells instead of price. Now, let me emphasize the stock is trading, but the price is not fluctuating. I have tried setting up charts for the moment of actual first trade, which would be beyond 9:30 when the market opens. I have not found them as useful or as powerful as the angles set for the opening of trading. In fact, in Planetary Stock Trading 4, the latest version of my book, I show you this with the chart of Facebook, where 9:30 provides a more accurate midheaven and ascendant than does 11:15, 11:30, or 11:45 if you can figure out when it began trading due to the NASDAQ glitches at that time. As George Bayer pointed out in the 1940s, the chart is akin to the opening of a store. Let us say the store opens at 9:30 a.m. The first customer does not make a purchase until 9:45. The point is that the stock could not have been purchased before 9:30 a.m., just as you couldn't purchase anything in the store. Most astrologers would take the opening of the store, but keep the data on the first purchase by a customer as an adjunct or auxiliary chart, which is what I would do. One can add the angles for the first time that the first trade chart actually occurred if it can be obtained for very old charts. Stocks started trading before we had PCs, you probably can get it. These days you can get that for any stock. It adds a second set of angles to the chart. And I explained Facebook in Planetary Stock Trading 4. Next, we see the CSX first trade horoscope. CSX, a railroad, began trading on November 3rd, 1980 at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in New York, which is where the New York Stock Exchange is located, of course. Now, the market opened at 10 a.m. until September 1985. I have that date in my book. After September of 85, it was 9:30. Take a look at the chart. Sun, 11 Scorpio, Mercury 11, 10 Scorpio, 11 actually. The midheaven is 15 Libra. And we also see Uranus at 25 degrees of Scorpio, Pluto at 22 Libra. They reported earnings in April 2014. Pluto was square the midheaven. It was around 13.5 degrees, which meant it was about 91.5, 92 degrees to the MC. And the lunar eclipse had fallen on Pluto. That is of secondary importance. The midheaven is the most important point in the first trade horoscope. It is equivalent or akin to someone making an announcement on a given day. If you know they're reporting earnings, you take the planets, put them around the chart, you compare the transits to the natal chart. If that midheaven is afflicted, what kind of an announcement would you think a human being would make? Probably a negative one. If Jupiter were parallel or conjunct the midheaven, you'd probably think it was a positive one. What you're measuring is the reaction of the public to the earnings announcement. The earnings may be 1 penny above estimates, and the stock may fall. It could be 1 penny below estimates, and the stock may rise. This chart does not tell you about the earnings The incorporation chart does. This chart tells you the reaction people have to the earnings announcement. If I threw a stone into the middle of a pond, the stone is the earnings announcement, the pond is the market. When the stone hits the surface of the water, it sends ripples out. Those ripples are the reaction of investors to the earnings announcement. You know they do have a range of earnings estimates, and they have a mean. And if you worked on Wall Street, if you are more than one standard deviation from that mean, the boss calls you in and wants to know what great news you have or what information you have that nobody else has to cause you to make an outlying earnings estimate. So there is a real herding mentality here. So I'm bringing into question what the earnings estimates really mean. Just be aware this is the reaction that people have to the earnings. So here we are. CSX fell 4% on the open, April 16th, 2014. Pluto was 90 to the midheaven. That's the primary hit. And the lunar eclipse was on Pluto. That was somewhat secondary. If you're into Elliott waves, you may, from that top, the high point on that chart, you could count 1, 2, a long 3, a 4, and then we caught the 5th wave. Now, I just want to bring your attention to this wide range on that day. You see that? That is approximately where I got out. I will very quickly share my trading tactics with you. I very frequently take positions within the last 10 minutes of trading on the day prior to the earnings announcement, and I close it out about 30 minutes, no more than 30 minutes into the trading day. Sometimes it's within 10 or 15 minutes. Look at this chart and you'll see the reason why. The stock opened up trading down here. Well, it opened up at here. It went that low, but then it closed up here. So I made a gain of about 3.5% because I got out quickly. Had I not done that, my gain would have been about, I think, 1.5 or 2. The stock fell 4% from the opening to the low of the day. So I just want to point out to you that you must react quickly. The great advantage to this method, which I'll explain in upcoming presentations, is that your exposure, in this case, my exposure was a total of about no more than 40 minutes of actual trading time. Now here is Twitter. The minute Twitter started trading, November 7th, 2013, 4 days after the eclipse conjunct Saturn on November 3rd, I said this isn't a very good time to start any type of venture, and sure enough, Twitter stock has not done well to date. In addition, I've been following technology for 30 years, and most of the value in a company like this is intellectual property, which is like a helium balloon. If it gets punctured, there goes your share price. By the rule of eclipses, an eclipse opposite eclipse number 1 will have an effect 6 months later. That eclipse was 11 Scorpio. There was an eclipse at 9 degrees Taurus in late April of 2014, and I took one look at it and I said, this will set off the first eclipse. I'll bet it'll be an earnings disappointment, and here you are. Once again, note that if you traded it, the stock opened up and then dropped to this point, but then rallied back, so you get out of it quickly. So this is not a good horoscope of first trade. Very positive aspects will turn Twitter up, but I don't think for very long. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Planetary Stock Trading 4 looks like this. It's available at BillMeridian.com. It contains about 800 horoscopes of first trade. It's got all of the lessons from editions 1, 2, 3, plus a special new section for edition 4. So visit the websites BillMeridian.com. Also go to astroapp.com. Gene Vicotan and I have teamed up to put the first trade charts online. There are thousands up there from the USA, Canadian, Australian, English, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai markets. It's updated weekly. Plus, there are tools to sort through the horoscopes in seconds. For example, if you see an eclipse coming up at 9 Taurus, you can zip through the entire database in seconds by entering 9 Taurus and just selecting the database. That will be the subject of a future presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.